Usually, when we try to understand a major global crisis, we instinctively look for a physical breaking point.
Right, like you want a visual spectacle.
Exactly, like a bridge collapsing into a river. You see the concrete crumble, you see the twisted rebar, and you immediately understand why the supply trucks can't get across.
It's human nature. I mean, we are totally conditioned to understand structural failures that way. We just want something we can point to on a map and say, that is where the system broke.
But the deeper you step into the reality of modern global warfare, the more you realize that the bridge is, well, it's completely invisible.
Yeah, we're looking at a breakdown of the global architecture that is, honestly, terrifyingly silent.
You don't see the explosion, but suddenly your grocery store shelves are empty. Or like your car manufacturing plant halts production and your energy bill skyrockets.
It is the absolute definition of a systemic cascade failure. The stress isn't applied to a physical object. It's applied to the underlying logic of the whole global economy.
So, welcome to the deep dive. We are recording this in mid-April 2026. And if you are looking at the desk in front of us right now, you would see an absolutely towering, chaotic stack of sources.
It's a lot of paper.
It really is. We have highly classified, well, recently declassified, military technical reports from Israel and the U.S. We have granular geopolitical analyses of Gulf state vulnerabilities.
Not to mention the dense actuarial marine insurance briefs from London.
Right, and essays on the shifting paradigms of international law, plus some really profound philosophical meditations trying to make sense of what the human race has just done to itself.
Because we are, of course, talking about Operation Epic Feely and this incredibly fragile new ceasefire that just went into effect on April 7th.
Now, before we really get into this, I need to make a very clear impartiality disclaimer to you listening. These sources contain some highly politically charged comparisons.
Oh, absolutely. They get into some very sensitive territory.
Yeah, specifically comparing the leadership of former President George H.W. Bush with President Donald Trump. And they detail some horrific actions by the Iranian regime, the U.S., and Israel.
Some of which are explicitly categorized in the reports as potential war crimes.
Right. So we want to be crystal clear. We are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing these viewpoints. Our role is strictly to unpack the factual claims and the analyses presented in these original documents.
We're just trying to help you understand the broader picture the sources are painting.
Exactly. Because looking at this stack of documents, what is truly overwhelming is how deeply interwoven these seemingly disparate fields are.
You really cannot separate the trajectory of an Iranian ballistic missile from the underwriting policies of a British insurance clerk.
Or the agricultural yield of an American farm. And that is our mission for this deep dive. We want to cut through the endless, superficial, 24/7 news cycle.
We need to understand the hidden machinery of this conflict.
Because this isn't just a localized story about missiles flying across the night sky. It's about the water you drink. It's about the microchips in your car.
And the software running silently in the background of your phone right now.
Yeah, and by the end of this deep dive, you are going to understand why a 39-kilometer stretch of water, named after an ancient god of order, is currently deciding the fate of global agriculture.
And why the quote-unquote winner of this war might actually be the one whose economy was destroyed.
So let's jump in. To understand why this April 7th ceasefire even happened, why these massive entrenched military powers suddenly decided to sit down at the negotiating table, we have to look at the physical reality of late March.
Right, it wasn't a sudden burst of diplomatic goodwill or, a change of heart.
No, it was math. They simply hit the bottom of the missile barrel.
The physical reality dictated the diplomacy. We are looking at a scenario where Israel and the Gulf states were actively, desperately rationing their top-tier interceptor missiles.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the Israeli air defense system is globally famous, but the military reports show it's a lot more complex than just a magical, impenetrable shield.
Yeah, it's a highly stratified, multi-tiered system, and they were burning through it at an unsustainable rate.
So at the very top tier, you have the Arrow 3. And this system is designed for exoatmospheric interception, right?
Right. It literally shoots down long-range ballistic missiles in space before they even re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. It has a range of roughly 1,491 miles.
Wow. And then you step down to the Arrow 2, which catches what the Arrow 3 misses.
Exactly. And below that, you have David's sling, David's sling serves the middle tier.
And what's the range on that one?
It utilizes the Stunner interceptor, which is designed for a range of about 186 miles, traveling at roughly Mach 7.5.
That is incredibly fast.
It is. It's a hit-to-kill system meant for tactical ballistic missiles and heavy cruise missiles. It doesn't just explode near the target, it relies on sheer kinetic force just slamming into the incoming missile to obliterate it.
And then at the very bottom tier, the one everyone knows about, is the Iron Dome.
Right, the Iron Dome uses the Tamir interceptor, but that was originally designed for short-range, relatively unsophisticated threats.
We are talking about a 45-mile range, crude rockets, mortars, small UAVs.
Yeah, and it uses a proximity fuse, so it gets close to the rocket and detonates, destroying the threat with shrapnel.
But the crisis highlighted in these military reports is that Israel entered Operation Epic Fury with their top-tier aero interceptors already heavily depleted.
Yes, from the previous localized conflicts with Iran back in June.
Which forces an incredibly dangerous tactical adaptation.
Because the high-end interceptors are running critically low, the Israeli military is essentially forced to stretch the capabilities of David's sling and the Iron Dome.
Right. The reports detail how they are pushing out rapid over-the-air software upgrades to these lower-tier systems.
They are trying to force them to identify and engage higher, faster, longer-range targets that they were just never physically engineered to handle.
Okay, wait. If they are using the Iron Dome to shoot down long-range ballistic missiles, isn't that like trying to stop a bowling ball with a tennis racket? How sustainable is this software stretching?
What's fascinating here is the brutal underlying asymmetry of it all. An Iron Dome Tamir interceptor costs roughly $50,000.
Which is cheap in military terms.
Right. It is a brilliant piece of engineering, but it is meant for relatively slow, crude projectiles. An Iranian medium-range ballistic missile is a massive multi-ton piece of heavy machinery re-entering the atmosphere at Mach 5 or higher.
So even if the software perfectly tracks it.
Exactly. Even if the radar perfectly tracks it and the interceptor perfectly intercepts it, the proximity fragmentation of the Tamir might not have enough kinetic energy to completely vaporize the reinforced warhead.
You might just alter its course slightly or break it into larger, still deadly pieces.
And we saw the tragic structural results of that mismatch. The reports explicitly detail how this system stretching directly resulted in catastrophic failures.
Yeah, the direct hit. We saw a pair of Iranian ballistic missiles completely penetrate the defense net.
One hit the town of Arad, crashing directly into the courtyard of an apartment block.
But even more alarmingly, one hit Dimona.
Dimona fundamentally changes the psychological landscape of the war. That is home to the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center,
which is Israel's main, highly classified nuclear facility.
The fact that an Iranian ballistic missile navigated through the multi-tiered defense net and detonated near there, it forced elderly residents to relocate indefinitely to reinforced bomb shelters.
It utterly shattered the psychological illusion of an impenetrable sky.
And this rapid depletion of munitions is not just an Israeli problem. The Gulf states, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, are under the exact same defensive pressure.
They rely heavily on American-made Patriot systems, right?
Yes, and they've been begging Washington for replenishments. The sources note the U.S. deployed Teddy systems, terminal high-altitude area defense, to the region.
And even one of those systems, positioned in Jordan, was reportedly damaged by an Iranian drone strike.
But the most chilling assessment of this entire situation comes from a logistics analyst at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Oh, I read this quote. It's wild.
He stated plainly regarding these high-end interceptors that they are vaporizing years of production in the last couple of weeks.
It's the difference between the cost and speed of offense versus defense. Iran mass produces these relatively cheap Shahed drones for maybe $20,000 apiece.
And they force the U.S. and Israel to use finite, multi-million-dollar interceptors to shoot them down.
Which connects directly back to you listening to this right now. If you ever wonder why conflicts in the Middle East instantly trigger panic and affect defense budgets in places like Ukraine,
it is because the global stockpile of advanced defense munitions is a single finite pool. And right now, it is currently draining.
But the exhaustion wasn't just happening in the sky. It wasn't just the military stockpiles that hit a wall.
No, it was the global economy.
The conflict triggered a systemic heart attack in global supply chains, centered entirely around one incredibly narrow geographic bottleneck.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. We are talking about a body of water that is only 39 kilometers, about 24 miles wide, at its narrowest point.
And I love that the sources brought up the etymology here.
It is too perfect. The essay by Mohammed al-Hashemi points out that the name Hormuz is derived from Hormuz.
Which is the Middle Persian rendering of Ahura Mazda, the ancient Zoroastrian deity of cosmic order.
A 39-kilometer stretch of water, named after the ancient god of order, has become the most chaotic, fragile vulnerability in the modern world.
And it is vastly misunderstood as just an oil choke point.
Right. I mean, roughly 20% of the world's global seaborne oil passes through there, which is massive.
But the sources argue that reducing it to an oil choke point is a dangerous underestimation. One analyst literally describes it as the aortic valve of globalized production.
Because the true vulnerability lies in the non-oil cargo. If you look at the cargo manifests, you are looking at the foundational chemistry of modern civilization.
We're talking about 50% of the world's traded urea.
And 30% of the world's global ammonia, which are the absolute bedrock of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers.
Without that, half the human population would starve.
And then you have a third of the world's global supply of helium passing through that gap.
Which isn't just for balloons. Helium is absolutely critical for cooling MRI machines and manufacturing semiconductors.
Every microchip in your car relies on that helium. Add to that crucial global supplies of aluminum and sulfur.
So when this war kicked off, what happened wasn't a traditional military blockade. The strait wasn't physically blocked by sunken ships.
No, we saw what analysts are calling a phantom blockade.
A phantom blockade is a terrifying evolution of warfare. Within 48 hours of the war commencing, marine insurance mutuals in London basically canceled war risk extensions.
By March 5th, commercial coverage completely vanished.
The actuaries literally couldn't mathematically price the risk of an Iranian missile hitting a commercial vessel.
So zero coverage.
Yeah.
And no ship captain is going to run a $200 million vessel through a war zone without insurance.
And this is where the cascading failures begin. You can't reroute bulk fertilizer.
No. The mid-April deadline for Northern Hemisphere nitrogen application means a blockage in March equals crop failures and lower yields globally by September.
The exact same unforgiving physics applies to the aluminum industry in the Gulf. If you shut down the power to those aluminum pot lines, the molten metal solidifies into solid rock.
It causes massive irreversible damage. But here is what I found so incredibly confusing when reading the legal briefs in our source stack.
The international law aspect.
Yes. Legally, under transit passage rules, the strait is considered open. It cannot be lawfully closed.
But states are operating around the rules. Iran was very careful not to physically block it.
So what does this all mean? If no laws were technically broken to close the strait, does international maritime law even matter anymore? Or is it just a suggestion waiting to be priced out by insurance companies?
It's weaponized uncertainty. They manage the navigation via calibrated pressure without declaring a formal blockade. They seize a few ships or create just enough risk, and the insurance disappears.
So any state with a handful of cheap anti-ship missiles can hold the global economy hostage without declaring war.
Exactly. And while the world was watching the Strait of Hormuz, two other deeply hidden and vital vulnerabilities were being exploited by both sides.
Thirst and zero-click control.
Let's start with thirst, the water infrastructure of the Middle East.
Now again, another reminder about impartiality. The intelligence reports allege that severe war crimes were likely committed by both sides here regarding civilian water supplies.
We're just unpacking the tactical reality presented in the reports. And that reality is that the Gulf relies almost entirely on desalination.
Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar rely on it for 90% or more of their drinking water. Saudi Arabia is at 70%, the UAE around 40%.
There is a WikiLeaks cable cited from 2008 analyzing the Jubail desalination plant in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that memo bluntly concluded that if the Jubail plant was hit, Riyadh would have to be evacuated within a week.
The text literally states the government could potentially collapse just from 7 days without water.
And during the height of Operation Epic Fury, these became active targets. The U.S. hit a major desalination plant on Iran's Qushm Island.
And Iran hit a vital desalination facility in Bahrain.
And we can't forget that Iran is desperately out of water itself due to decades of poor extraction and reckless dam building.
Which brings us to the second hidden front, cyber vulnerability, specifically Pegasus.
Developed by the Israeli NSO group. This is a zero-click exploit that takes total control of phones.
You don't even have to click a link. It bypasses end-to-end encryption by reading the screen directly.
The financial scale here is staggering. The The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain spent roughly 4.72 billion euros over 5 years on this.
And the sources detail the widespread misuse of Pegasus against dissidents like Jamal Khashoggi's network and even royal family members like Princess Haya.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You have these wealthy Gulf states buying billions in invisible digital weapons from Israel to control their own people, while simultaneously spending billions trying to protect their highly visible, highly fragile water pipes from Iranian missiles. Is a country's true weakness its borders or its basic utilities?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these tools were the shadow diplomacy that paved the way for the Abraham Accords.
Right, they used Israeli tech for internal control while publicly navigating the geopolitical middle ground.
But this delicate balance brings us to the economic paradox of this war, because the target of all this destruction actually profited.
Yes, the U.S. and Israel heavily targeted Iranian civilian and economic infrastructure in Phase 3 of the war.
The goal was to force them to reopen the strait. They hit the B-1 bridge, massive steel plants.
And petrochemicals,
Yeah.
knocking out 85% of their petrochemical export capacity, which is the section that funds the military.
The human toll was horrific. 18.5 million Iranians live within 1 kilometer of a strike.
There was that horrific strike near an IRGC naval base that hit a girls' school, killing at least 175 people.
Plus 60% unemployment and widespread internet blackouts.
But here's the paradox. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is thriving financially.
Because they are paid in crude oil by the government, surging global prices literally doubled their revenue.
And with foreign imports crushed, Iranians are forced to buy exclusively from IRGC-owned domestic monopolies.
Food, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, they became a completely captive market.
Plus, they are financially insulated. Iran uses China for payments, and the Shihab system linked to Russia's mirror network to bypass Western banks entirely.
So the regime's core financial engine remained entirely intact and actually grew.
Okay, if the IRGC is making twice as much money while their civilians face 60% unemployment and destroyed schools, didn't the U.S. strategy of economic attrition completely backfire?
This raises an important question about resilience. The U.S. faced a catch-22.
The only way to truly bankrupt the IRGC is to hit oil production.
Exactly. But doing so would make a desperate Iran destroy the Gulf's energy infrastructure, crashing the entire globe.
So Iran is willing to endure catastrophic civilian economic damage as long as the regime can retain power and impose costs on its adversaries.
It's a game of pain tolerance. And this perfectly transitions us to examining the leadership and strategy that finally led to a ceasefire.
Right. Facing a resilient IRGC, a closed strait, and empty missile silos, they had to find an off-ramp.
The sources provide a really fascinating comparison of leadership styles here, comparing George H.W. Bush in 1991 to Donald Trump in 2026.
Under Bush, it was multilateral. A 42-country coalition, limited objectives, and a 90% domestic approval rating.
Whereas under Trump, the analysts describe it as aggressively unilateral with Israel.
Shifting goals from missile programs to regime change, verbose threats to obliterate civilizations on social media, and a highly partisan domestic reception.
Not to mention the economic cost to the average American.
Oh yeah, an estimated $400 a month spike
Yeah.
just due to fuel and fertilizer costs.
Right.
And Trump used the conflict to justify a 40% defense budget increase while suggesting cuts to domestic programs.
But eventually, the sheer cost forced a halt. On April 7th, mediated by Pakistan, the ceasefire was signed.
The strait partially reopens, but Iran demands tolls. So why did both sides accept this messy draw?
The analysts apply a concept from game theory called the dollar auction.
Okay, yes, the dollar auction. Both sides keep escalating just to avoid losing their initial investment.
It's the sunk cost fallacy. You bid $1.10 for a $1 bill, because if you stop, you lose your earlier bids.
And by late March, the U.S. and Iran hit diminishing returns. They were bidding $5 to win a $1 prize.
Exactly. So they essentially agreed to pause the auction. The military calls this mowing the grass.
Which means they achieved minimal military goals but failed the strategic ones. The nuclear threat remains. The IRGC is in power. They just trimmed the threat for now.
Right.
But we're looking at a triangular negotiation, the U.S., Israel, and Iran. If the U.S. just wants the strait open, but Israel wants total freedom of action in Lebanon, how can a permanent ceasefire ever hold when the allies don't even have the same endgame?
That is the geopolitical fracture point. The underlying plates haven't settled.
Which brings us to the final and most philosophical part of our deep dive.
To truly grasp what this conflict means, we have to look at the underlying philosophy driving global affairs.
The documents dive into three major thinkers applied to this war, starting with Martin Heidegger and his concept of Gestell, or enframing.
Heidegger argued that modern technology forces us to view absolutely everything as a standing reserve, a resource to be controlled.
Moving from resource discovery to management to absolute control, energy, chips, trade routes, it's all a resource to be weaponized.
Then you layer in John Mearsheimer's theory of offensive realism.
Right, the shift from defensive realism, where states just want security, to offensive realism, where states want maximum power.
Constant competition and mini-wars are considered normal.
And finally, Giorgio Agamben and his concept of bare life, or biopolitics.
The human cost. People are reduced to mere biological existence, stripped of rights, treated as manageable objects via surveillance, blockades, and sanctions.
So basically, Heidegger explains the mode of control everything. Mearsheimer explains the method, compete aggressively. And Agamben explains the victims, reduced to bare life.
It's a synthesis of control, aggressive power politics, and expendable populations.
You don't need a philosophy degree to see this. You just have to look at 18.5 million Iranians living next to bomb sites, or a farmer in the Midwest who can't get fertilizer.
Agamben warns that the state of exception, the temporary suspension of rules, is becoming permanent.
War is no longer an anomaly. It is a continuous condition of modern supply chains and statecraft.
The permanent state of exception is just how the world works now.
And that wraps up the massive scope of this deep dive. Operation Epic Fury wasn't just a localized conflict. It was a stress test of the entire global system.
From the finite number of interceptor missiles to the fragile water pipes of the Gulf.
To the invisible financial blockades of insurance companies and the terrifying resilience of the IRGC.
Every single layer was tested.
And we want to remind you, listening to this, why this matters to your daily life. The globalization that brings goods to your door is incredibly fragile.
We've seen what happens when the aortic valve of the world flutters for just a few weeks.
The ceasefire is holding for now, but it leaves us with an uncomfortable question to explore on your own.
A really unsettling one.
If our entire modern existence, our food, our tech, our energy, relies on a 39-kilometer gap of water named after an ancient god, and the states guarding it view conflict as a permanent, acceptable state of affairs, how long until the next heart attack? And next time, will there be any insurance left to cover the damage?